Once more again, good afternoon, learners. Welcome back to the second session. We are now going to have a look at a very important topic, our essay questions. Section C, where you are able to get a lot of marks, but if you do not answer appropriately, you are on the wrong side, then you end up getting 0. So we want to make sure that at the end of the day, each and every one of you is able to get full marks for the essays. Where you are seated right now, I want you to ask yourself, what do you understand by essay? And how do this type of question differ from other questions? What special skills are being tested by this type of questioning? I hope that you are giving answers as I am talking right now. Then what is important when you get these questions? Remember, our essays, we get them in section C, question 7, question 8, question 9, and question 10. Again, when we do our essays, it is very important to look at the examination guidelines, because in all the LOs, in all the topics, it has been clearly outlined in the examination guidelines which questions are possible essay type questions. So it is very important for you to prepare in line with the examination guidelines so that you can be able to score a lot of marks in this section. The first thing that you get, your question 7, your question 8, your question 9, and question 10. It is very, very important for you to read and understand the question, because most of the times you find that the learners, the candidates write, unfortunately, the wrong responses, and they end up not getting any mark. Because if you merely see a question based on perfect competition, you don't read thoroughly what is expected of you, and you end up losing marks. So that is why it is very important for you to read and understand the question. Step 1, analyze the question to find out what is wanted. It is very important for you to look at the question properly. What is wanted by the examiners? What are they trying to test? What are they trying to assess? And how is your response supposed to be? That is what you are supposed to look for when you analyze the question. And then secondly, read the question again. Read it again so that you can clearly understand what is expected of you. Establish the context. Break up the question into different parts or instructions. We are going to have a look at how to break down the question into different parts at a later stage. But it is very important for you to identify those verbs, because they inform you on what you should look for and what you are expected to give in your response in section C. So make sure that you also understand that the question, like we have seen recently, we have a situation where in our section C, we've got 2 questions in one. So you must know which part are you supposed to answer in full, which part are you supposed to answer briefly, so that you can be able to get a lot of marks. Because if you don't do that, you find a lot of learners who are making a lot of mistakes where they are going to get a part where they are supposed to focus, discuss in detail for 30 marks, but they merely discuss briefly and therefore get 10 marks and they lose 30 marks. So it is very important for you to break down your question into different parts according to the instructions. Identify the possible responses that you might give. In other words, you are going to plan your responses, the points that you are going to give in your response, and thereafter sequence the responses appropriately. Then part 2, when you plan your essay, remember in economics we've got 3 marks which will be allocated to your introduction. Learners, it is very important for you to write at the beginning of your lesson introduction before you give the brief statement. Your opening statement, before you give that opening statement, write the introduction. Because if you don't write the introduction, you will not be allocated marks, because it is not going to be known that this is going to be your introduction. So it is therefore very important for you to always indicate by writing introduction at the beginning that you are going to give a brief statement of the content you are going to consider or related content. Most of you usually give a definition as your introduction. But again, look the context in which the question has been phrased, so that you can give an appropriate definition, or if you give a definition, also beef it up with some content there, so that you can understand that you know exactly what you are going to write about in your introduction. Remember, marks are allocated for the introduction. So it means that if you don't have the introduction, there is no way that you are going to get full marks for your essay, because you will not be having the opening statement there. Then body, your body again, once you go to this part, you must write body, so that the people who will be marking your paper should know that now we are going into the second part of your essay, which is the body, the contents. Now what we need there, we need main factual content. We also need you to write in paragraphs. We need you to give headings and subheadings where necessary. Also, diagrams where appropriate. For an example, right now we are busy dealing with the graphs. In case you are expected to draw the graphs, indicate where necessary. And this is going to form 40 marks. So it means that if you are able to plan your essay appropriately, your introduction, you are able to get full marks, 3 marks, as well as your body, you already have 43 marks. And your conclusion, what do you do in the conclusion? You give a brief evaluation. You draw the points together. In other words, you give your own opinion or your recommendation regarding the question that was given to you. That is why you show the understanding. Remember your introduction. You cannot have the same introduction as well as the conclusion. Remember, with the introduction, you give a brief statement of what you are going to discuss. And then in your conclusion, you wrap up. You give your own opinion, a recommendation regarding what you have been discussing. Then you are going to be allocated 2 marks because you were able to give the judging statement. And the 2 marks, it means now you've got 45 marks. And remember, in economics, we also award marks for the interpretation of the topic. Those learners that get between 1 and 15, we say 1 plus 1, therefore you are going to get 2 out of 50. Or in case you get 15, it's going to be 15 plus 1, then you get 16 out of 50. And then those learners who are going to get between 16 and 30, we say 16 plus 3 or 30 plus 3, which is going to be 33 out of 50. Those candidates who are going to get over 31 and over, they are going to get 31 plus 5, which is going to be 36, or 40 plus 5 or 45 plus 5 if you are able to get full marks for the introduction, for the body, as well as for the conclusion. Therefore, you are going to get the full marks. So please, learners, don't neglect to plan appropriately on how you are going to respond to your essays. And there are things that you should remember when writing essays. Remember, paragraph your essay. Paragraph contains an idea of group of ideas. If you are going to talk about the profits that are made by the monopolist, it's obvious that you are going to face this. You are going to these ideas. You are going to group them together in the same paragraph. If you are going to talk about the price determination, you are going to have a different paragraph where you'll be explaining appropriately how prices are determined, for an example, in perfect competition. And remember to include diagrams or graphs where appropriate, but don't simply draw the diagram. Refer to it and carefully explain in full sentences. If you have been asked to illustrate the economic profits in the long run of a monopolist, don't just draw the graph, but keep on referring to the graph to indicate that you understand appropriately what it has to do with the contents that you have given in your essay. With 2-part questions, make sure to allocate time effectively between the two. Remember, at times you are given 2 topics in one question, where you might, for an example, be expected to discuss perfect competition in full and briefly indicate the reasons why you won't participate in monopolistic competition. So it's obvious that question has 2 parts. And that one where you have been asked to discuss it in detail, to discuss it in full, it's obvious that you'll have to allocate more time because more marks will be allocated to that content. This one, which is based on monopolistic competition, why you not participate in such a market? It will be merely allocated 10 marks. Therefore, we don't expect you to spend a lot of time because only 10 marks will be allocated. But remember, if you are not able to interpret your questions appropriately, if you are not able to break down your questions appropriately by identifying exactly the verbs, by identifying the instructions on what is expected of you in the response, you will not be able to give the response that is needed, and therefore you are going to lose marks. Hence, we said in the beginning, read the question, read it again if you have to do so that you can understand exactly what is needed of you. And remember, answer in full. Don't just give, for an example, where you are expected to discuss the perfect competition as a market structure, then you say homogeneous. If you say homogeneous, what does homogeneous stand for? You are supposed to indicate by giving, for an example, a heading. You are talking about the nature of the product. The nature of the product that are sold in this market, they are homogeneous, implying that they are the same in all respect. That is what we expect of you. Don't just write briefly. Remember, if you don't give full sentences, you are not going to get full marks. And we are all aiming for full marks. Consider breakdown of marks if given. If perhaps in your question paper they've indicated that this part is going to be allocated 30 marks and the other one will be allocated 10 marks, it's obvious that you'll have to focus more. You'll have to give more content on the one that is allocated 30 marks and you are going to give less on the one that is allocated 10 marks. Essay writing takes practice. So therefore, you are expected to ensure that you practice these essays on a daily basis. Remember, you have your examination guidelines. Those of you that have lost the copies of the examination guidelines, make sure that you request the copies from your teachers so that you can thoroughly prepare those long questions. At least it's not going to be a surprise for you. You are going to be able to plan, answer. Remember, we are having a written examination. So there's no way you are going to prepare an oral examination in economics. We expect you to write. Hence, we say essay writing takes practice. So therefore, gives yourself time to sit down and look at those long questions that will be asked per examination guidelines.
There we are, grade 12 learners. Let's look at our essays. As you know that we drew the different graphs for the perfect market as well as the imperfect. And on Wednesday, we saw that if you start drawing your graphs, you should label all the graphs. But now we can use those same graphs in a essay type of question. Let's look at question 8. Question 8. Use the graphs to analyze the various short-term equilibrium positions for an individual business in the perfect market. So, first of all, if we have to apply the principles that Mesefu just elaborated on, you must identify different words that are important in that question. First of all, on which market does this question apply? It is you see the perfect market. So now you already know you must refer to the graphs of the perfect market. And it is, they further say, use the graphs to analyze the various short-run equilibrium positions. If you can remember, on Wednesday, we spoke about the 3 different positions. So let's look at those 3, and you will see in this essay, you will draw your graphs and describe it in full sentences. Let's first look at our normal profit. If you remember, we started with your vertical line as well as your horizontal. The labeling of that is important. Again, it's your cost and your revenue together with your quantity. We still gonna color block today? Are you still fashionable? Yes, I believe so. Now, how are we going to describe this this graph? It is important when you draw your graphs, as you go step by step, you also write your sentence underneath that. First of all, we had the horizontal line, which was our revenue line, and we had the color green there. Do you still remember? Yes. That is your revenue line. So, when you describe this graph, you also you write it in full. I have a horizontal revenue line which we call our average revenue and our marginal revenue, and it also represents the demand curve. Okay, our next step is our MC, and we called it the Nike curve. Okay, color in your Nike curve again with the pink. We stick to our colors, the pink. So, in order for us to find our profit maximization point. So, where is our profit maximization point? We said we never mix the curves, we never mix marginal with average. So, we use the marginal revenue together with the marginal cost. So, where the two intersects, that is at point E1. At point E1, there you get your maximum profit. So, in your essay, when you describe this, that is your next sentence that you write down. You get your equilibrium, it is at E1. So, it's the same as on your graph, your sentence will describe the very same. And where is that equilibrium? It is where the MC is equal to the MR. And if we look at the price at that level, the price that is P1 and the quantity it is Q1. So that is the next sentence you are writing. At my equilibrium point, the quantity that we produce is Q1 and the market price is P1. Then our third curve was the AC. There is our AC curve. So now you can describe that position of the AC curve. The AC curve you use to determine the normal profit. And where is that normal profit? Where the AC is equal to the AR. I repeat myself, your normal profit is the MC is equal to, the AC is equal to the AR. So that is the next sentence you are writing down. You get your normal profit where the AR is equal to the AC. And then you describe what does normal profit mean, which is the minimum earnings required to prevent the entrepreneur from leaving and using his factors of production elsewhere. So, if you can see here clearly, I've showed you that every time when you indicate something on the graph, if it is revenue line or if it is one of your cost curves there, you write it also in full sentence just at the bottom of that graph. The same will apply then for the economic profit. Okay, the economic profit, how will you describe this? Again, you will start by showing your revenue line. So again, you use your revenue line. Where is the revenue line? You describe it. It is the horizontal line on the graph, and it represents the MR, the AR, as well as the demand curve. Okay. Then the next, you want to find the equilibrium position and the maximum profit. So again, you draw your MC curve, MC, to find where these two graphs intersect. And you see it's again at E1. So that is your next sentence that you will write down. I find my equilibrium where the MC is equal to the MR. And what is the quantity and the price at that position? This is at Q1 that are produced and at a price of P1. So then after that, you go to your average cost curve. Okay, there is your average cost curve. Different position as the previous one, the normal profit. It's not on the revenue line, but it is now below. It is now below the revenue line, the turning point there. So again, you say there, you're in full sentences. Your average revenue, which is the green, the horizontal line, is more than my average cost. So the next step is to determine the economic profit. How did we do that? Again, you start from your equilibrium point, which is on the revenue line. You go down to your cost curve, and then you close the box, as we said on Wednesday. You close your box, so you move to your vertical line. Then you will find the shaded area. You remember there must be your four positions, which is the one is, the first bullet is S, P1, E1, and R. That is how you write also in your essay, how you describe it. Let's look at the explanation there at the bottom. The price, which is also the average revenue, is now greater than the average cost. So therefore, there is an economic profit, which is represented by that shaded area, which we call the P1, E1, R, and the S. Okay, that is and that is how you describe your curve. So if your graph, if you can draw your graph, you can also describe it, but just follow the steps. Immediately when you indicate something on the graph, you also describe it at the bottom. So if you are done drawing your graph, your explanation is also done. Then our last position, there will be your economic loss. You start the same way as the previous. There you have again the vertical X, which is called the cost or the revenue line, and then at the bottom there is your quantity. Remember to write out the words in full. Okay. Then again you start with your horizontal line, which is your revenue line, and it represents the average revenue, marginal revenue, and it's also your demand curve. Again the same steps. I want to find my maximum profit point as well as my equilibrium, and there I need the marginal. We're only going to work with marginal. So we already have the MR, so the only one that we need is the MC. So there is our MC, the night curve. The night curve is there. Okay. So where those two intersects, which is at E1, there you will find your profit, maximization point, and also your equilibrium. And look at the sentence at the bottom of that graph. Just below the graph, you will see equilibrium is at E1. In other words, the firm will produce where the MC is equal to the MR. So it's just that which we just drew now, there we wrote it in the form of a sentence. The next one is, we finish with the marginal curves now. So we can now concentrate on the average curves. Remember, you don't mix the curves. You don't talk about marginal cost and average revenue. It's never like that. It's marginal together with marginal. So it's marginal revenue together with marginal cost. When you refer to the average curves, you can't say average revenue together with marginal cost. The average must go together with the average. So, okay, then the next position is where the average cost is above the revenue line. Okay, there we have it. So now we're going to describe the average curves. Okay, the position of those two. So the average cost, which is now here at a cost of M, is more than the average revenue, which is P1. Can you see? The further you move from the origin point, the higher the cost or the price. So here you see, it's first you find P1, then M, it's at the higher position. So it must be the greater one. And M it's next to your, if you move from your M, you go to your graphs, you will find it will touch the average cost curve. So the average cost in this case is more than the average revenue. So when your cost is more, you know immediately it is a loss. So now at the bottom you can describe now. At the equilibrium point, the price is the same as the average revenue is less than my average cost. And the AC curve lies above. There we see it. It's the above. So just the way we drew it there, you describe it here at the bottom in full sentences. So now the business makes an economic loss. And what is the economic loss? It's this shaded area. In other words, it's the revenue minus the cost. And you get the difference of M, L, E1 and P1. So that is then my economic loss. And you can write that also at the bottom. You can say my economic loss is then the M, L, E1, P1. And this is how you describe and explain your different graphs. You will see all the graphs there have your AC curve has the different position. The first one with the loss there, the last one that we did now, is your AC above the revenue line. And take note of the marks that you can score for that graph. There's a total of 8 marks, and every sentence, every fact at the bottom, it counts 2 marks in total. 2 for that first sentence, 2 for the second one, 2 for the third one, and again 2 for the last one. So it's also 8 there. The same applies with your normal profit. Normal profit, there you can see the normal profit. the position of the AC is now, it's not above, but it's on the revenue line. It's on the revenue line, so now it is a normal profit. Again, look at the labeling of all the graphs there. The labeling, you can score 8 marks. And the explanation, it is only this graphs that you drew, you are explaining it in full sentences. And the same with your last one, your economic profit. It's the very same. Where is my AC now? It's not above, it's not on the revenue line, but this time it is below the revenue line. And the same there, you can score your 8 marks. And there is the explanation of the graph. But it is important that you follow the steps. Don't try to first draw everything and then describe. First, draw one and describe. Draw the other curve and describe at the bottom. That is if the examiner asks you to explain the graph. So, just remember for the graphs, you can either be asked to draw the graph, only the graph, or in an essay, they will be expected from you to explain it also. But don't forget, as Ms. Sefu indicated earlier, your introduction, your body, as well as your conclusion. If we look at this question, it was all about the perfect market. So, for your introduction, you describe the characteristics of the perfect market. Let we just read through that. A perfect market is a market structure which has a large number of buyers and sellers who are not able to influence the price, because we call them therefore the price takers. So can you see how your table can also be used in this question, because this is part of the characteristics that you learned earlier on in the table. So make sure that you know your table, and if you can draw your graphs, you can also then explain the graphs.
Okay, learners, we are going back to the presentation that we had earlier on regarding our essays. Now we want to see whether you are able to interpret the questions appropriately. Remember the first step, you analyze the question to find out what is wanted. Let us quickly have a look at the question now. There it is. There's our question, the question that you are going to have a look at right now. You are going to examine the monopoly as a market structure and briefly compare it to the perfect market. Let us have a look at it. Examine the monopoly as a market structure and briefly compare it to the perfect market. Can you see how many times we have read through the question? Because we want to make sense of what is expected of us. Examine the monopoly as a market structure and briefly compare it to the perfect market. Remember what I said on Tuesday. You identify your cognitive verbs, because your verbs will tell you what is expected of you. When you look at it, can you kindly identify those verbs right now? Are you doing so in the sentence? The first verb that you can see, I hear somebody else saying it is examine. Therefore, what do? You've got your question paper at hand. You say examine, you have already identified there. It means that it is a verb which tells you what to examine. What are you going to examine? The monopoly. And what do? You underline. So it means that you are going to examine the monopoly. That is the first instruction that you are given. And how are you going to examine this monopoly? You are not just going to examine it in any way. You are going to examine it as a market structure. So So you now know that you have been given the skeleton on how you should respond to the question. So it means that is the first part of your response. And then, secondly, briefly, you can also identify the second. Can you see now? It means we've got the second verb. What are you going to briefly compare? Briefly compare it to what? To the perfect market. So it shows that we've got two aspects that we are supposed to focus on in our question. So it means the first thing that you had to look at right now, you had to look at examine. What were you examining there? It is very important that you get convinced, you interpret it appropriately so that you can give the correct response. You examine what? If you have to go through it again, the monopoly as a market structure. Can you see that? Monopoly as a market structure, it means it is the first part of your response that you should give. And secondly, you briefly. So it means that you are not going to do it in detail. This response is not going to be needed in detail. You are going to briefly, in other words, in short, you compare it to the perfect market. So it shows that the second part of your response, you have to give the comparison. You compare perfect market with the monopoly. So it means the first part, you will have to give the response where monopoly as a market structure will be highlighted in detail, and then briefly you are just going to compare it to the perfect market. Let us quickly see what is in our response. Remember the first thing. Remember we said that it is very important for you to give the introduction. This introduction, do not just give the definition or the opening statement there. We want you to write that heading, introduction, so that you can see that you are dealing with your introduction. And then, after you have given the introduction, when you note here the major organizational features of a market, number of sellers, buyers, the degree of product differentiation, the availability of information are called the structure of the market. Remember what you did earlier on with Meyer. And secondly, you've got an alternative response that can be given as an introduction here. It is a market structure in which there is only one seller of a good or service that has no close substitute. Entry into that market is completely blocked. Remember, you have a right of giving your own introduction, which is appropriate. We are just trying to indicate to you that you must give the introduction, which is in line with what is expected of you in the question. And then you write your body. Can you see there? You've got body now. That body, we want to see it that you are going into the second part of your question, which is the body now. And then what are you going to discuss? Remember the first part. You examine, let us go back to the question. You examine the monopoly as a market structure. As a market structure, that is the first part of your response that you have to give. And thereafter, remember what you did with Meyer when you looked at the table. Do you see why she said that the table is very important? Because if you know your table off by heart, it means that you will be able to answer any market structure. Remember the table that she did earlier on, it indicated monopoly as a market structure, oligopoly as a market structure, monopolistic competition as a market structure, as well as perfect competition as a market structure. It means once you have done the table, you will be in a position to respond to whatever is expected of you in the question paper. Now you do monopoly as a market structure. There it is. Can you see? You have been allocated marks there. If you have written the number of firms, you have been allocated 2 marks, which means that it is very important for you to write the headings. Remember, in some of the question papers that you might have seen, there are instances where these headings have not been allocated marks. But it is very important for you to give more rather than giving less, because we want you to get full marks. And therefore, it is very important whether you respond to the question in section B or in section C, right there, number of firms. And thereafter, you give the explanation. You don't just go into the explanation, but you first give what? The heading there. All right? That is the characteristics. And what are you discussing? Monopoly as a market structure. Whereas a perfectly competitive industry consists of a large number of small firms, the monopoly consists out of one single firm. Can you see immediately here in the sentence they have dealt with perfectly competitive industry as well as the monopoly. And monopoly is also the industry. We have seen that when we dealt with the perfect competition, we've got two graphs where we spoke of the industry as well as another graph where we spoke of the individual firms. But when it comes to the monopolies, we are talking about the monopoly is also the industry. Hence, we don't have two separate graphs where prices are established. And then we've got our example there. The common one in South Africa, we've got our Eskom, which does not have any competition. And then, remember, it has been said, briefly again, compare it to the perfect market. Your comparison, you can also do your comparison when you talk about the number of firms and immediately give a comparison about perfect competition. In the perfect market, there is a large number of firms. So it means that once you are done with this characteristic, you can move on to the next one because you have fully looked at the points that we have given here. They've got 2, 4, 6, and it means that 6 marks have been allocated for what? For the monopolist, and 2 marks because remember, you are doing perfect competition briefly. Hence, you are not expected to give the explanation in full. And then we move on to the next one, the nature of the product. I hope you can see how important it is for you to know that table. But remember what Memeyer said earlier on. It is very important for you to give these explanations in full. Hence, when we had a look at our essays, where we are being directed on how we should write our essays, we said that we are not expecting you to give short responses there, but you are going to write in full, in paragraphs and so on. The product is unique with no close substitute. It means you are talking about the monopolist here, where the product is unique and we know that there is no close substitute. And then we move to the next one. They have given you an example where diamonds are unique and there is no close substitute. And the comparison, remember we said the second part of your question should not be neglected because you are supposed to compare it to the perfect market. Hence, there is a comparison in the perfect market. Products are sold are homogeneous. Remember, in that table, you only see homogeneous. Therefore, we don't expect you to just write homogeneous, but we want you to write it in full. In the perfect markets, products sold are homogeneous. Remember, if you merely say homogeneous, we don't know what are you responding to. Are you saying that the monopolists are offering products that are homogeneous or the perfect competitor? Hence, it is very important for you to indicate. Do not be lazy to write your responses in full so that you can be able to get a lot of marks. And then you go to the third one, market entry. Exactly what you did again with Memeyer. Then you explain there. It refers to how easy or difficult it is for business to enter or to leave the market. And when we look, remember you are discussing, you examine monopoly as a market structure in full. Therefore, you say it is entirely blocked. In other words, in as far as the entry of this market, we say it is blocked. A number of barriers to entry that may give rise to the monopoly can be economics of scale, limited size of the market, and so on. I want to warn you here, don't be flattered and assume that you are just going to give these examples and get full marks. Because in some question papers, 2 marks have been allocated for all these examples that have been given here. So it is therefore important for you to talk about how difficult it is to enter this market and therefore say that the entry is blocked. And then you give the comparison as well. In the perfect market, there is complete freedom of entry and exit. Can you see that they constantly say in the perfect market? It is very important for you to refer and say perfect market so that it can be known that you are giving the explanation of perfect market so that you can be able to get full marks. Remember, we said that we are not working for minimum marks here, but we want to ensure that at the end of the day, you are going to get full marks where you are going to obtain your level 7. Hence, you are seated here on a Friday afternoon listening to the lesson so that you can be able to study thoroughly and understand how you should respond to your questions because you are a level 7 learner. Market information. Market information is one of the characteristics. It is one of the characteristics, and therefore it refers to the market participants' information on market conditions. And remember, we are dealing with what? We are dealing with the monopolies because you have been requested to examine the monopolist in detail. All information on market conditions should be available to both buyers and sellers. And it means that there is no uncertainty. Remember, we are talking of one seller here who knows exactly what is happening in the market. Hence, there are no uncertainties. And then we come to the next one. This assumption also applies in the case of the monopoly. In perfect market, both sellers and buyers have full knowledge of all prevailing market conditions. Control over the price, it is the next one. A perfectly competitive business has no control over the business, over the price of its product, and therefore is a price taker. That is what you have seen earlier on in your table. You have seen that when we speak of a monopolist, we are talking about somebody who is referred to as a price maker. But when we talk about a perfectly competitive firm, they are price takers. But with a monopolist is a price maker. In the case of a monopoly, there are considerable price control, but limited by market demand and the goal of profit maximization. So therefore, it means that our monopolist is a price maker, whilst our perfect competitor is a price taker. Don't forget that. In the perfect market, no individual buyer or seller is able to influence the market price. But we say control over the price. Our monopolist has a solid control over the price, total control over the price. And then we come to the demand curve for the firm's product. You have seen the demand curve for the monopolist as well as the demand curve for the perfect competitor. Now let us look at what is contained in our response. We are dealing with monopolist here, the first one. It equals the market demand curve. So therefore, we don't have a separate demand curve. We also have a downward sloping demand curve from left to right. The one that we have seen earlier on, which we said that our demand is equal to our average revenue. Can you still remember that? It is downward sloping. And in the perfect market, the market demand also slopes downwards from left to right. I want you to note in this response, we are talking about the market demand curve. Market demand curve, you should know that it slopes downwards. But when you talk about individual business or individual firm, we are saying its horizontal, its demand curve is horizontal. Can you note that? So please make sure that you can clearly distinguish between the two. The market demand curve of a perfect competitor slopes downwards from left to right, but once the individual business demand curve is horizontal because the actual price is taken from the market demand, which is also our market price. And we also have the long run economic profit. Remember, this is exactly in line with what you did earlier on in your table. We just want to show you how important it is to give these sentences in full. Go through your table so that you can be able. When you look at the long run economic profit, for the monopolist, it can be positive because new entries are blocked. Remember, earlier on we had a look at the entry. We said that the entry is completely blocked. It means that we can only have one person operating in this market who is a seller, just like our ESCOM. Because new entries are blocked and short-run economic profit, therefore, cannot be reduced by new competing firms entering the industry. The monopoly can therefore continue to earn economic profit as long as the demand for its product remains intact. Remember, when we dealt with the graphs, you have seen that as long as they produce the quantities at the prices at which the consumers can afford them, they can also earn economic profits in the long run. But in the perfect market, economic profit does not exist on the long run. Why doesn't it exist? Because the entry is free. Can you remember? The entry is free, the exit is free, so it means that whoever wants to enter the market as a seller or as a buyer, they are free to do so. Usually what happens in the perfect market, in the short run, we've got economic profit. But in the long run, because other entrants, other sellers are willing to also earn the economic profits, what do? They join when they see others earning economic profit. And because of the new entrants, do you still remember what we had a look at on Tuesday? We have seen a situation where the supply was shifting to the left when there was a decrease in quantity supplied. But normally, in the long run, quantity supplied will increase, and therefore our supply curve will shift to the right. And if it shifts to the right, what's going to happen? We have more quantities and the price is going to increase. So therefore we are saying those are the characteristics that you should give whenever you are requested. Let us have a look at how mark allocation was done. Any 5 multiplied by 6. Can you see? So it means you have to give how many headings? 5 multiplied by 6. It means it's 6 points per. So it means it's going to be 6 marks for one, 6 marks for another one, and therefore ultimately we are going to have 30 marks for the discussion on the monopoly. And then because you were just asked to briefly compare with perfect market, 10 marks have been allocated to perfect market. Hence we are going to have a total mark of 40. So then we move to another question. When you look at this question, it was asked in 2009. We are busy looking at the question paper of 2009. And then, again there, I want you to have a look. The conclusion is there as well. The conclusion is there. So it is very important for you to make sure that you get the maximum mark, which is 50. And then we also have our interpretation of the topic, just like I explained earlier on how you can be able to get your full marks. It was a question which appeared in 2009. Now again we have a look at the question that was asked in 2011 in March. Remember we said that we are interpreting the questions. I want you to break down the question so that you can be able to respond appropriately to the question. Remember the first thing that you should identify, what did I say? You identify your verbs. You identify your verbs. And what is your verb here? Discuss. Discuss. And once you are asked to discuss, it means that you are going to respond fully to the question. And what are you going to discuss? You discuss monopoly as a market structure. Can you see now? The very same question that was asked earlier on, you discuss monopoly as a market structure. It means you are going to base more attention, more time on monopoly as a market structure. In your discussion, compare. Can you see? Compare this market with the conditions of perfect competition. So it means that you've got part 1, just like we have seen in the previous question, and part 2. So where you'll be discussing in detail monopoly as a market structure, in your discussion, compare this with market with conditions of perfect competition. I want us to quickly have a look at our response. Can you quickly have a look at the response that we got here? When you look here, the comparison has not been given. It has been given in the end. It has not been given here where we start. Remember, your introduction is very, very important. Your introduction is very important. You give your introduction. You give your body. Write the body there. You give your explanations. We'll not go through the explanations because we have already done that. And in this case, we have also been given a demand curve of a monopolist. Remember, what did we say? They are saying here it's faced with demand curves. Demand curve which is downward sloping, which is also equal to our AR. And we've got those characteristics. They have been given. The explanations have been given. I just want us to focus at the last part there. Just have a look at the comparison. Can you see the comparison now? The comparison, we have been given a feature. We have been given monopoly on the second column and then perfect competition on the last one. So it means that you are going to compare. The first thing that you are going to compare the number of firms, and then you say, in monopolies, there is only one seller and many buyers. And with perfect competition, large number of buyers and sellers. No firm can influence the market. And again, nature of the product, the same. You are going to give the explanation. This is the table that Mayor gave you earlier on. So we just wanted to indicate to you that this table is very important. It allows you to get full marks, but you are not just going to write in short. You are going to write, give your response in full so that you can get full marks. We know that you are capable of making it. Let us have a look at another question where we are going to interpret. Remember, right now we want you to interpret the questions appropriately, because if you don't interpret your questions appropriately, you are going to miss out on the marks. It is very painful where you see a person giving the wrong information because the question has not been interpreted correctly. Now we look at the third question. Remember, we are just focusing on our long questions now so that you can see how to give the responses in our long question. Remember, we are doing comparison between perfect competition and monopoly. And now we look at this question. Distinguish between the market structure of a monopoly and a perfect competitor in detail. In addition, draw a fully labeled graph to show the long-term equilibrium position of any one of the above markets. Remember what we said earlier on when we looked at how you should respond to the long questions. Do not hesitate to read through the question again. I want you, as it is right now, read through this question so that you can understand what is expected of you. I hope you can see the question, read through the question. What is needed from you? To do what? To distinguish between what? The market structure of a monopoly as well as what? A perfect competitor in detail. It means now you've got two market structures where you are going to distinguish. All right? It means you are going to do that in detail. In addition, draw a fully labeled graph to show the long-term equilibrium position of any one of the above markets. Your response can either be in tabular form or in paragraphs. Full sentences are required. So what do you do now? Let us go back. What are you supposed to do? You identify. What is your first verb? You identify, distinguish. Can you see that? There it is. Between what? Between the market structure of a monopoly and perfect competitor in detail. So it means you've got the first part that you are going to do. You distinguish between monopoly as well as perfect competitor in detail. In addition, what are you supposed to do? You draw. There is your another verb. You draw a fully labeled graph. Fully labeled graph, it means that it is another part of your response. Show what? The long-term equilibrium. It means you are not just going to indicate any graph, but the long-term equilibrium position of any one of the above markets. My good learners, when you do this one, make sure that you do as indicated here. Your response can either be in tabular form or in paragraphs. And don't forget, show the long-term equilibrium position of any one of the above markets. When you do so, label it appropriately. Let us quickly have a look at the response. There it is, shape of the demand curve, number of businesses. The comparison is done in full because you are expected to distinguish between the two market structures. So it means that they carry the same weight. You are not going to give little information on perfect market or on monopoly, but you are expected to balance your response. Hence, you are going to do the comparison in full. There it is. And again, you do, as we have seen earlier on, entry and so on. You do in full, you give. Yes, I want you to have a look at this one. Remember what I said when you looked at the entry. Let us have a look at the monopoly here. A number of barriers to entry that may give rise to monopoly. How many marks have been given to our examples? Only 2 marks. Only 1 example has been allocated a mark. Yes, you can give more, but I'm saying don't just avoid to give the explanations. Rather give the explanation first and thereafter give the examples. All right? And then again, when you look at the way the marks have been allocated, allocate a maximum of 20 marks per market structure. It means when you look at our perfect market, 20 marks will be given to the perfect market, and again, 20 marks will be given to our monopoly. But remember, you are supposed to write at the end, indicate that graph. So it means that if you have given 20 here, 20 marks will be given based on perfect market or monopoly, but you are not going to get full marks if you did not indicate your graphs. When you look at our graphs there, please indicate the heading. The graph, it is that one of perfect competition, or if you draw what one of the monopolies, do so. Because if you merely draw the graph, while you illustrate it like it has happened here, but you did not indicate that you are now illustrating the perfect competition or the monopoly, you are going to forfeit a lot of marks. And have a look here. Remember the illustrations that you did earlier on with Meyer. Marks are there. For the headings, can you see? I said the heading is very important. You get 1. For labeling of the axis, you get 2 for the price as well as the quantity. Labeling on axis, again, you get another mark. Indicate origin. You are going to get full marks if you indicate distance appropriately. Do not forget, long term, how will you see it? LMC. Short term, SMC. There it is with the monopolist as well. It is possible for you to obtain full marks. And remember, with LO2, the dynamics of market, it is easy for you to get marks because the long questions that you are going to do in the topic, they are quite few because you know, whatever you do regarding perfect competition, you are going to get as an essay. Whatever you do regarding monopoly, you are going to get as an essay. You also include your policies when you do perfect competition, and thereafter, you know, with your monopolistic competition as well as your oligopoly, you are not going to get it for 30 marks. You can get it to a minimum of 10 marks, but it is very important that you prepare thoroughly so that you can be able to get full marks in case you get it in section B or section C. If you do this accordingly, as you have explained, there is no way that you can get less marks. You are going to get 50 marks in section B and your 50 marks in section C for the content that is based on dynamics of the markets. Thank you. Next week we will go on with market failures.